And we're spending time with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale today, and she, of course, is the founder and a medical doctor at St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat, with offices over on the island just off of 312 on Plantation Island Drive, and up in Ponte Vedra as well, near Nice High School off of US 1. Dr. DePasquale, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You have a very interesting background, obviously. We were talking off the air. You were born in India.
Yes, I was.
Where in India? So all of us here kind of know where Delhi is, but we don't know much else.
So I was born in Bangalore, so that is South India, much further down than Delhi, which is in the north.
So when did you leave India and come to the United States?
I was 10 months old.
Oh, so you can't remember? You don't remember much about it?
No, not at all. Only what my mother tells me.
But so you grew up here in the United States. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up actually in New York City for a little while, and then we went to New Jersey for about a year, and then came down to Florida.
Okay, all right. So how do you think, being born in India, even though you were only there for 10 months, how has that impacted your life overall?
I think probably more so from the perspective of my parents, probably more so than me, because I honestly don't remember anything except growing up in the United States. So,
right.
But from their experiences and the stories they've told me about how things were back in the day when they grew up, and, American parents do that as well. But the stories are a little different. We have different cultures, different experiences. So I feel that it's impacted me a little differently because of that.
Why did your parents leave India?
My dad actually felt that there wasn't much of a future there in India. There was a lot of civil unrest going on at the time when he decided to leave. So my mom and he had probably been married, I want to say maybe a year and a half or something like that. And then my dad came over to the United States because it's the land of opportunity, and he wanted to find a job here and get himself set up. So he left when I was pretty much, I don't know if it was just a few days after I was born, but very shortly thereafter to get over here and find a job and get himself settled.
If you're just joining us, this is Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and she joins us on the air each week, and we're just taking a little break from talking about healthcare topics to talk a little bit more about her background, which is interesting. She was born in India, obviously has a very accomplished past, and we're talking a little bit now about her parents. And so did your mom and dad, were they part of I know you have a caste system in India, or they did anyway, of a certain class, right?
Yes.
Were they of a certain class or caste?
Yes. And I don't know that I really agree with all that, but
right.
But they did. And, it was very important to them. But growing up in the United States, I find that it's very different how unimportant it is to me, because
right.
this country is just different. We're not really doing that whole caste system.
Right. So did they have any relatives here when they were able to come over from India? This is obviously a brand new country for them. Was there any sort of a support system for them when they landed here?
I don't think, that's a good question. I want to say that my dad's older brother was already here. To be honest with you, I don't remember the timing, but he was older. So I imagine he might have been here, but I'm not entirely sure about that. My dad was the third child of 7.
Wow.
So he did have an older brother that lived here. I just don't know who came first, to be honest with you.
I guess what always amazes me as somebody who was fortunate enough to be born here in the United States, for folks like your dad and your mom, that I can't imagine the level of anxiety coming from a country into a country where I don't speak probably all that well, the basic language. Did they speak English really well?
They did, but probably not as well as we,
right.
the Americans would have liked, because back then they had much more of an accent than they do now. They've been in this country for, a few years, so that's dissipated to a good degree, but still, back then I imagine it was much thicker, the accent.
Yeah, and just landing here and saying, okay, now I have to not only provide a life for myself, but I have to, take care of my family. And
Exactly.
This is a foreign nation.
Exactly.
I guess I kind of look at it in reverse. If I were to just pick up and move to India, what would it be like? Could I start a radio station there? Probably not,
Probably not.
And then what would it be like for, for my family or my children or what have you? I just think don't you think the anxiety level had to be sky high?
I can't even imagine. I mean, he tells us stories about what he went through, but I don't think it even comes close to, I don't think I can come close to understanding what he truly felt. I mean, he came here, he didn't have a lot of money, he needed to find a job. He wasn't sure, he wasn't really understanding the language as well as he does now. He didn't know where to live. Mm-hmm. He didn't know the food was different. So I just can't imagine all those changes and just leaving by yourself.
Yeah.
And coming to another country and figuring it all out.
Well, very brave, very courageous thing. We're talking with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale and a little bit about her background. Of course, she's the founder of St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat. She's a medical doctor, obviously, and does a lot more. So we're going to get back to her in just a moment. So stay tuned. And we're back with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and this week we're talking about a little bit different stuff than healthcare topics. We're actually talking about her life a little bit. She's going to let us drill into her life, and it doesn't bother you, right?
No, of course not. I'm an open book.
So, you were born in India. You left at 10 months. Obviously, you grew up here. When you went to elementary school, okay, I've always found that elementary school kids can be kind of rough sometimes. And, how many other Indian kids were in your class?
Oh, that's a good question. I really don't remember there being any, but there might have been.
So was it basically let's face it, a lily white classroom?
Probably.
Except for you.
Probably.
Right? How did you sense that at all when you're sitting there in the third grade, second grade, that, hey, I don't look like all these other kids, or were they pretty welcoming of you?
I would say for the most part, they were pretty welcoming. This was in New York City, so it's a diverse
Cultural
population.
melting pot,
yeah, so I think because I was there, I didn't feel as that I stood out quite as much.
So as you worked your way through elementary school, high school, did you sense that other kids just sort of expected you to be really, really smart? Because let's face it, the Indian kid is always the smartest kid in the room.
I guess that's true. That definitely did happen. I used to actually try to pretend like I was much less intelligent than I was.
Really?
Yes, because it was embarrassing to get good grades and all that. So I actually found it to be embarrassing. I used to pretend like I didn't really understand things. And it was,
when you did.
Yeah.
Man, that's like the original dumbing down, just for the record, I never did that, Oh, man. So interesting. So while you're going through that and, pretending to be dumb to not embarrass kids like me, when did you say, well, you know what? I'm a pretty good student here. I know a lot, and I think maybe someday I might want to be a doctor.
Well, I actually knew I wanted to be a doctor when I was pretty young. And the people that I knew in middle school and high school all knew that I wanted to be a doctor. But still, it didn't prevent me from trying to act like I didn't really know things.
Right.
I just wanted to fit in. And
why did you want to be a doctor?
Well, I just remember when my dad was sick at about 5 years old, he was really sick. I don't know if it was just a bad chest cold or something.
Yeah.
And at that point, I wanted to make him feel better. I hated to see him suffering. And I told him I wanted to be a doctor. And then later on, I just became very, very interested in surgery and the idea of fixing things in a human body to make it work better.
Right.
So I became really interested in surgery. And then eventually I decided on ENT as a specialty.
So in biology, I would have been maneuvering to be your lab partner.
Oh, yeah. I had that happen a lot.
You were probably cute anyway, but I would have also, that would have been the primary reason. But the secondary reason would have been, she is going to get me the A that I need in this part of my biology grade. So at some point when you were in biology, you had to do like your first surgery, right? You would have actually maybe cut open a frog or a fetal pig or something.
I think the frog was first and the pig came later.
All right, so the first time, then when you have a lab partner, usually somebody gets to actually use the knife and then somebody gets to watch. You were probably the one that grabbed the knife.
Oh, yeah.
You were assertive, weren't you?
Yes, I was assertive. It did not bother me. I think we even dissected a worm.
Wow.
I remember that, too, way back when.
And you like that, too?
Yes. I don't like worms now, so I don't know how I liked it back then.
But you liked it then because that was the start, right?
Exactly.
Interesting. So when you're sitting there in high school and you're doing really well in biology and math classes and all that, and you want to be a doctor, I guess you probably felt inside there really wasn't any doubt, right? You really never felt like, maybe I'm not going to be a doctor. You're in your mind, I can imagine, just because I feel like I know you a little bit, there was no doubt. Like, you knew you would be a doctor.
Yeah, I was very committed. That was the goal. Every day I woke up and said, I'm going to get on my path to being a physician today. Yeah. And it was just kind of how it went in my house.
Now, I remember from the sidelines as a liberal arts major, history major, watching the folks in college that wanted to be a doctor. And there was this day in their life, usually I think their sophomore year in college, organic chemistry.
Oh, God.
That was sort of the make or break for people that really wanted to go to med school, right?
Yes.
Because if they didn't, at least in my day, if they didn't get an A or a B in organic chemistry, they're pretty much done.
Exactly.
So did you you remember that day? You remember those
I remember those days very, very well.
So I'm going to go really far out on a limb here with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale and guess that you got an A in organic chemistry in college.
Actually, that was a moment of enlightenment for me. I had pretty much breezed through high school without studying, and that's why I didn't want to tell people that I was getting good grades with barely studying.
Yeah.
I didn't want to tell them. And all of a sudden, I get to organic chemistry, and I think I'm going to do this again without studying. And it was a moment of rude awakening for me. Not only did I have to study, I had to study really, really hard to get a B.
Wow, you got a B.
I got a B.
And you didn't have to fake it.
No.
But all
and
your friends probably thought you were faking it.
It was hard. I mean, that was the hardest B I've ever had to earn in my life.
I just remember the reason I had that memory, my college roommate was valedictorian of our high school and was a big high school, 3,000 kids. And he was brilliant, near perfect SAT scores, wanted to be a doctor. And got a C, his first C of his life.
Oh, gosh.
In organic chemistry, and became an accountant and is a CPA today. So probably a frustrated doctor. He's a great CPA.
Out. Yeah, it's a weed out course. It's the weed out course. Exactly.
Interesting. Wow. So from that point forward, though, you worked hard, you got your B, and you were still on the mission to become a doctor.
Exactly.
Was it downhill after that?
Yeah, I mean, it was just adjusting to so many different things in college. I mean, I had parents that were definitely very supportive, but, they were also things were tight at my home. I mean, I couldn't I didn't have a lot of freedom, I guess is the bottom line. So all of a sudden I got to college and then I had freedom, and it was kind of hard to decide what to do with all of that freedom. So
we'll explore that in a little more detail. We'll find out how much of a party girl Dr. DePasquale was in college, and just so you want to stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. And we're back with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and if you're just joining us, normally we talk about some various healthcare topics and the like, but today we're talking about sort of how she became a doctor, which is very interesting. She was born in India, moved here, a great family story, and we're sort of working our way through. And, at last we were talking about leaving high school, going on to college. You went to the University of Florida, right?
I did. Gator.
You're a Gator.
Yes,
Gator
I'm a
Nation.
Gator.
So you go to the University of Florida. I guess at that point, there are other Indian students there, right?
Oh, lots. I mean, at that point, it was a whole different environment. I grew up, most of my high school and middle school years were in Stuart, Florida. So, I mean, there were a few other ethnic people around, but not really the kind that I saw when I got to University of Florida.
But as you were growing up, did you find yourself gravitating toward other Indian students or other ethnic students, or did you just sort of hang out with white kids, black kids, brown kids, purple kids?
Pretty much, yeah, it didn't really matter.
Interesting. But did you notice that sometimes other kids that did have maybe shared your Indian ancestry or ethnicity tended to hang out with other Indian kids?
Yes. I mean, I found that most Indian people were probably hanging out with other Indian folks.
Yeah.
I love diversity in my life, though, so I never wanted to stick with just one kind of culture.
Right.
I love knowing about all kinds of different people and their different cultures, and I enjoy that. So I hate to stick to one prototype as my friends.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know what your life experience was like, but for me, I went to a high school near an Air Force base. So it was very ethnically diverse in terms of how people hung out with each other. You really didn't care, it was white, black, Asians, what have you. But when I went to college, it felt very segregated, that at that point, the kids kind of broke off into, they were more like themselves, and maybe that's because I went to a very small college, but that's interesting that you would continue that, and you continue that today, right? You don't really,
no.
You don't really seek out, and I guess those opportunities would exist, right? If you wanted to be more engaged in just the Indian culture,
right? But I feel I'm definitely Indian. Obviously, that's my culture. But I grew up in the United States, so it's funny when people meet me for the first time and they're very confused. My patients or anywhere out and about. And my last name is DePasquale. Are you Italian? And I say no, I'm Indian. But you don't have an accent.
Right.
It's very confusing for them.
Yeah.
And I explain that I've grown up here, I've gone to school here, so I speak like an American. So I don't like to stick with one crowd of people. I love the diversity of my friends and the people that I know, because I learned so much, and I have friends that are Hispanic and I love speaking or trying to speak Spanish with them. And I just love people from all different cultures. I enjoy that also in my traveling as well. I just love seeing different cultures, different people, how they live is one of the joys of my life.
That's very good. Dr. Kalpana DePasquale is with us here, and we're talking about her life story and sort of her engaging culture and becoming a doctor. At some point when you were in medical school and then going on to your residency, did you ever feel that people just expected you to be really, really good at your game because you were an Indian doctor,
I guess that's probably true. Are there?
Why do you think that is?
Well, are there any on Grey's Anatomy that are Indian? I can't remember. I've not watched that show.
It's still on.
It is?
Yeah.
I never watched
17 years later or whatever.
Goodness gracious. But yes, I feel like people say, well, you're Indian. You should be really
good.
there's a stereotype associated with being Indian.
Yeah, there is, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
I mean, I would almost feel badly for somebody who just that was of Indian descent and just goofed off all during school, right? Can you imagine the
I'm
pressure?
sure they exist. I'm sure they exist.
But they expect those folks to be like just incredibly brilliant.
Yes. Well, my brother was like that. He goofed off for a long time in school and then got his act together and everything just turned around.
Talk to us a little bit about that, sort of the Indian family dynamic. So you moved here at 10 months of age. Obviously, your parents, moved here from India, so they probably spent roughly, more than half their life here in the United States, but maybe
right.
A good chunk of their life, at least a third in India. What's family life like? How do you think it's different for the way you grew up as a teenager than your teenage boys are growing up in your home?
I think the biggest difference was I really tried hard to make myself be a part of the American culture, which I don't think my kids really care about that just because they're
already part of it.
Yeah, they're already part of it. So me being a first-generation Indian in the United States and I was the oldest, I really sort of had to find my way of feeling like I was a part of something.
So what did you do? Give us some specific examples of where you feel like you had to maybe even overcompensate in that regard.
Well, I do remember when my parents would speak Indian in front of my friends. I really hated that.
Really?
I hated that. Don't talk. Speak English.
See, I can tell you as a white kid, if I had gone to your house, I would have found that really cool.
Right. I realize that now, but back then it was very, very embarrassing. And also, anything with our food, I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk about that we ate some different food. I mean, we ate American food as well, but, a lot of it was Indian food. And I didn't want to talk about that with people.
Now everybody wants to go out to an Indian restaurant.
Right. Now, exactly. Now it's like, wow, I love Indian food.
Even back then they did.
Well, probably. I just didn't know it, so I tried to hide the fact that we had different ethnic food, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, I wouldn't have been allowed because I'm a guy, but say Bonnie, who's here with us, say she had been allowed to go into Kalpana's bedroom at 15. Would there have been any posters on the wall of like Bryan Adams or something like that? I mean, Sting, really?
And Duran Duran.
Oh, Duran. Oh, my gosh.
Now I'm dating myself.
Yeah, Duran. Hungry like the wolf.
Exactly.
Dr. Kalpana DePasquale is with us. So what did your parents think of you putting up all these American rock star posters on your wall?
They did not have a problem with that, actually.
Good for them.
All they cared about was that my room was clean in comparison to my sister, whose room they didn't want to even go inside.
Yeah.
So my room was always spick and span. I always had everything dusted, cleaned. So they didn't really have a problem with all my posters. I was also a big car fan, actually, in retrospect.
Really?
I really had a lot of photos of posters of, they cut them out from the magazines, of course. That's what I did. And post them all over my wall. So rock stars and cars, and it's pretty funny. I wish I had a photo of that. I wonder what I had up there.
That would have been cool. We would have liked that. We would have put that on Facebook today. Well, anyway, we're spending some time learning more about Dr. Kalpana DePasquale. Very interesting stuff. We'll be right back. And we're back with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and she joins us each and every week. And normally we're talking about all sorts of different healthcare topics that relate to our health status, but we want to take a little bit of a break this week and talk instead about her background and her life so you can understand her a little bit more. And, I'll be honest with you, Dr. DePasquale, from the outside, people would look, I guess, as they look at most medical doctors and say, wow, what a great life. You have it all, right? Money and, great home and family and big house, the whole deal. What would it be like to just have that kind of life that's had absolutely no speed bumps in it? Right?
That would say they don't really know me at all.
Okay. Well, tell them. Talk to them.
Well, I think the biggest speed bump was probably when I was in my mid-30s. I had thyroid cancer.
Wow.
I had just started my practice here probably, I want to say it was 6 months prior to that. And, all of a sudden I had to, have my thyroid removed, have surgery, have radioactive iodine. And it was so difficult because I didn't want to tell anybody about it because I didn't have the strongest support group here. I just moved here. So I knew a few people, but not really well enough to share. So I had my friends from before. They were obviously a big sense of support. But I didn't want other people to know that I even had a problem because I didn't want to people to think I was sick or, I didn't want my practice to suffer. So I really just had to internalize everything. And my children were small. They were about 4 and 1 at the time. So even though I treat thyroid cancer and I know that this wasn't a death sentence, I have to say emotionally, it was probably one of the most difficult times for me, just knowing that something was wrong with me and I was young and I was supposed to be invincible still.
Right.
That was a hard thing to process.
And that leads into a discussion, too, of your husband, right, who you met, just almost like a Grey's Anatomy episode, right? You met back in medical school, right?
No, we met in college.
Met in college at
we
Florida.
Met in college, yes,
So
at
he's a
University
Gator,
of Florida.
too.
He's a Gator,
Go
too.
Gators.
We wouldn't have it any other way.
Right. So you guys met in college romance, and now all these years later, how many years has it been?
It's almost 22.
Yeah. And that's been a perfect marriage. With absolutely, there's never been an argument.
Oh, yeah. I actually have people tell me that, and I think to myself, really?
Well, I've seen you guys out and about, though, and you the great thing for you and I'm sure for your children is that you guys seem to be best friends.
Yeah. To me, that's the first and foremost thing in a marriage. You can probably get through anything if you're best friends.
Right.
So I hate to tell people when people ask me, who's my best friend? And I'm like, gosh, because it sounds corny when you say it's your husband. So
Yeah. Well, that's the bumper sticker you have in your car out in the parking lot. My husband is my best friend.
Oh, yeah, no.
So, obviously, happily married, and then we should get to a very, very important part of your life, probably even more so than medicine. And next to your husband would be your kids.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The loves of my life.
2 boys.
Yes.
And tell us about them.
Oh, well, they're just, I can't believe they're all grown up. That's the first thing. But, they have definitely been a source of sometimes anxiety, frustration. And now just watching them grow up into these wonderful little human beings is just a source of big joy.
Yeah. So just from my perspective, I pity the first girl to come home from college for your oldest son. That's going to be rough.
Yeah, probably will be. For me, especially. I think my husband's going to be okay with it, but I'm not so sure about me.
Yeah. No, she is going to be like it for an interesting experience. Now, I'm sure you'll be very kind to her, but
I'll try.
Yeah. When you think about your sons, and, obviously your mom and dad had some plans for you, and it may have been, fairly stressful for you to live up to their expectations. And you're trying to learn from that so that maybe for your boys it's not so stressful. But you have some real goals that you want for them, right? Well, what do you want for your kids?
Mostly I want them to be independent. I want them to be confident, self-sufficient, and I want them to be productive members of society. And They know this. So I haven't put neither my husband or I have put any stipulations on them about what they should do. But in what we've tried to do is really explain to them what we've seen that they excel at. And, are these some interests of yours? Are they not interests of yours? So I think it's interesting the way that they are different from us and in many ways very similar to both of us as well.
Right. And you ready for them to move away someday, which for your oldest could be not very long?
No, not very long. I mean, I want him to be on his own. I want him to have the life that he needs to live, but it's a little tragic in some ways. But I'm hoping that we were good enough parents that he is going to want to come home as opposed to being forcing him to come home, which is what happened to me.
Yeah. There's always a little bit of guilt, though. You can always use the guilt lever. You are a mom.
True.
You're entitled to that.
If necessary, I will not hesitate to use it.
Hey, we've talked about a lot of different topics, but before we let you go today, we're spending time once again with Dr. Kalpana DePasquale, and we've kind of pushed on her just to share a little bit about her life, and she's been very gracious to do so. What's the future? Obviously you've gotten very involved. You have a segment on Channel 4. You're out there a lot in the community giving seminars and the like, and we appreciate you doing this radio program with us. But what is Dr. DePasquale, what does Kalpana DePasquale want to be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Well, that's a great question.
Because you're a young professional woman. I mean, you have a whole life ahead of you.
Yeah, at least another 70 years, right?
At least, I would hope.
Well, I see myself, I definitely seeing patients still, but I have to say that over the last few years, I've really enjoyed the media, whether it's television, radio, giving seminars. What I love is the fact that we can tell people, educate people in the masses. So, for example, when I see a patient in the office, I'm only seeing one patient at a time. But I love the idea that on television I can educate, I'm hoping, thousands of people, on the airwaves. And that's nice because then I can flood the airwaves with good information. Sometimes everything we see on the media isn't always accurate.
No.
And that personally is a pet peeve of mine. Yeah. So, hey, it'd be great to one day maybe be like the next Dr. Oz, but maybe more realistic, maybe
better,
maybe a better Dr.
different. Oz. Yeah.
But it's
you also
fun.
have better hair. I know people think he has great hair. You have better hair. That's important in television.
That is important.
That's why I never made it in TV. I don't have any hair, but you have great hair. Well, that was very interesting stuff, and thank you for sharing some of your life and some of your personal story with us. Not a lot of people are comfortable in doing that, but I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for allowing me to utilize all this time to talk about myself here.
Yeah. Dr. Kalpana DePasquale with St. Augustine Ear, Nose, and Throat, 2 locations here in St. Johns County. You can learn more by going to saent.net. That's saent.net. And join us again next week. We'll spend some more time with her.